Hey guys, welcome back to Bible Home to Duns. Today we're on day 29 of our Advent and we read Luke chapter 22. And so this is a really important part that we call the Lord's Supper, where Jesus basically, this is his last meal with his disciples, and he breaks the bread to represent his body, and he drinks the wine to represent his blood. So we're going to get into that, and so let's get started.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the chapter opens up by giving us the details to let us know what time of year and what season all of this is building up to. So, for instance, look in verse number 1. It says, "Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called Passover." Now, Passover is the name of the festival, and it represents the time in Egypt where the angel of death moved into Egypt and killed the firstborn of every family. But those who had sacrificed a lamb and painted its blood on their doorpost, the angel of death did not stop at their home. Instead, the angel of death passed over. Now, that's where we get the name Passover. When it uses the word here, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, here's what that means. Whenever they celebrated the Passover, this was a huge holiday for them. Think about Easter, or think about Christmas. I mean, this is a central holiday to their celebration. So they're calling it the Feast of Unleavened Bread because during this time, they would remember that when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they weren't allowed to put any leaven in the breads that would make it rise. They were eating flat bread because they were in a hurry to get out. God was delivering them and they didn't have time to wait. Matter of fact, they ate their whole meal dressed with their belts on, with their coats on, with their walking stick at the table. They were ready to leave at any minute, in the way where they were leaving the bondage of Egypt, but it's more fully going to be expressed in coming out of the bondage of sin that Jesus takes us out of. So, in this story, now we're casting back to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The original readers are picking up on this and they're going, oh, when the Exodus happened. And then Passover, they're thinking, oh, when the lamb was sacrificed so that death didn't come. Now they're hearing it. So look at verse number 2. "And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people." Now, as per the holiday, the Jewish people were purging their house. They were searching their houses for any yeast that would go in bread, and they were removing it completely out of their households. The irony is that even though they're taking the leaven out, which symbolizes sin, if you're trying to be symbolic, the irony of these two sentences back to back, that they're celebrating Passover, but they're plotting how they can kill him, is that even though these guys went home that night to clean out their houses, their heart was evil and wicked. So they're celebrating, but they're not participating. We also know that in this story, that it's talking about in verse number 1, it's talking about Passover, where the lamb would die. In verse number 2, it's talking about how they were plotting against Jesus. So Luke is trying to tell us, hey, by the way, Jesus is the real lamb. Now, this is important because in our Advent book, on page 144, it said this. It said, "After this celebration, the disciples would always look at Passover in a different light. All the lambs that had been sacrificed would be fulfilled in the last sacrifice, that is Jesus Christ, the Passover lamb." In Israel during Passover, there were a lot of lambs being sacrificed. Matter of fact, an ancient historian named Josephus, how many did he say?
He said 250,000 lambs.
250,000 lambs per Passover were sacrificed. Now, you multiply that over some 1,500 years between Moses and Jesus, you got 250,000 lambs for that long. Listen, we're talking millions and millions of lambs, but none of them did what the single death of Jesus could do. Because all of those lambs were just symbols and placeholders, kicking the can down the road for the ultimate sacrifice. The other key to this is that this is not a battle against flesh and blood. So look in verse 3. "Then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. Now, I want you to remember back. So Luke has already told us about the devil before. So if we went back in our Bibles to chapter 4, verse 13, Jesus goes into the wilderness, right after his baptism, prior to him starting his ministry, and he's tempted in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. He's tempted the whole time, but the last 3 temptations are recorded for us. Jesus, at the temptations, overcame every single temptation. He was tempted. Listen, we don't have record of all the temptations he endured, just the last 3. But the scripture says that Jesus endured everything that we would be tempted with, and he remained without sin. Anything we could be tempted with, he was tempted with, and he still remained holy and sinless. So when the devil is defeated, because he can't get Jesus to fall, the Bible has an interesting little blurb there. It says, and so the devil left him seeking an opportune time. Well, this is the opportune time. He found a willing person, Judas. And now a plan is unfolding. Now here's what's scary to me. When the Bible talks about the devil, it talks about the devil that he comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Okay? To steal, to kill, to destroy. It also describes the devil in terms of he is a thief, he is a liar, and he is a murderer. Okay, listen. What did Judas become as he surrenders to this influence of Satan? He becomes a thief because he was stealing out of the money bag, remember? He becomes a liar because he's hiding a secret. He's traveling, but he doesn't believe. Okay? And he sells Jesus out and they crucify Jesus. He becomes a murderer. He becomes who he has surrendered to, and in this case, it's the devil. While all this is happening, Jesus is in the upper room, and he's taking the Last Supper with his apostles. And basically, what happens in this Last Supper is Jack's talked about the breaking of the bread symbolizes the breaking of Jesus's body on the cross. The drinking of the wine symbolizes the shedding of his blood. In a way now where when we partake of the Lord's Supper, we're no longer just remembering Passover. We're remembering Jesus. He is the Passover. In this whole story now, Jesus, his words here have a sense of ending because we know he's about to die, but they also have a sense about him that something is beginning. He's talking about, I'm not going to drink of the fruit of the vine until I drink of it in the last days. So, although his life is ending, he's also indicating something new is beginning in this story. This meal would no longer be about just the Passover. Matter of fact, this meal is going to be about a new exodus. Instead of out of Egypt, it's a new exodus out of sin. Why? Because Jesus took our place on the cross and he exited us. He redeemed us out of sin and hell and death and the grave. And he brought us out through his grace and through his mercy. And like our book says, that we have to partake of Jesus personally. And it even says here on page 115, a growing personal relationship with Jesus is the only thing that can satisfy the hunger and thirst of your soul. And so what we have here in this long story, this long chapter, which, by the way, we can't get into every facet of this in under 10 minutes. But just understand this. This is all about the Passover has been preparing people to understand what the Messiah is going to do. And then Jesus ends it with do this in remembrance of me. And then he says, until I come again. So we don't just remember, we also anticipate. And we also glorify Jesus for what he's done. For the joy that was set before him. He endured the pain, he endured the cross, and he died for us. All right? I hope you're enjoying Advent. We'll see you tomorrow on the next day. Looking forward to it. See you then. Bye.